And we
Right.
are online now on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just check with my telephone. Could you talk, please, Eli? I'm just testing the uh, YouTube live.
So, okay. Now we are testing the voice quality and the YouTube. I think that should be okay, and there should be no problems.
Could you talk, please, Eli? I'm just testing the YouTube
So,
live.
okay.
Okay,
Now we are
perfect.
testing
Everything is
the
set.
voice quality.
Ah,
Okay.
so, and how about my slides? Oh no, you can't see that. It's okay. Let me share. Okay. Can you see my
Yes.
slides? Okay.
Yes.
And now?
Yes.
Perfect. Could, do you have the rights to admit people?
No, I don't have.
Okay, I should do that by myself. Okay. So we start now or we wait a few minutes?
I think we can wait for 5 minutes, and after that we begin.
Okay, so I let you I let you manage people
All right.
and questions. Okay.
Questions. I've messaged the person in charge, but if he doesn't appear, I can handle it.
Okay.
Now I have the permission to admit people.
I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
if you have the rights.
Good.
General. I think as I created the event, I'm the only person who have the rights to admit people. So if someone arrive and needs to enter to this session, just interrupt me and tell me. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. The talk should take 25 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah. And after the 25 minutes, we can have question and answers. Okay.
Yes. Yes. I will look for the questions in the chat box, and I will read them for you.
Okay. And if you could have a look on YouTube too, I think there will be no question on YouTube, but it's possible.
All right, I will check that.
Okay, Ruhala is here.
Okay.
Is there any non-Persian member here?
I think there
Yes,
is one.
there is Jose, and that's all. Okay, perfect. Oh, let's start, Elahe.
All right.
Okay.
So, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ela Hussainzadeh, and I will be your host for today's talk. Tonight, we have the honor to have Seper as our speaker to talk about naming in DDD, which will be a DDD Foundation talk in this year's DDD Europe event. And we have the privilege of hosting this event sooner in DDD Iran community. I gotta mention that you can ask your questions in the chat box, and by the end of the talk, we will answer them. And unfortunately, we don't have Khaled today due to COVID. All right, I think that's all. Seper, would you like to introduce yourselves and begin the talk?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Elahe. Hi everyone, welcome to our naming in DDD session, or how you express your intentions in your code. My name is Seper Namdar. I'm a technology agnostic developer. That means that I'm interested in any subject that does not have a link to a particular technology, like DDD, architecture, craft, and so on. I'm also a co-founder of DDD Iran community, which is a Persian community for developers. And currently I'm working for Shodo as a software engineer in Paris. So if you have any question, you can write your questions in the chat, and then Elahe will send them to me. Okay. So Khaled could not be here with us today because of COVID. We hope that he get better very soon, and I hope that I will be able to do the talk in few days in DDD Europe with him. We will see. So who already knows this famous quote from Phil Carton? There are only two hard things in computer science, which are cache invalidation and naming things. I think you already saw this quote. It's a famous quote. And here, Phil Carton by naming means finding right names, because naming is easy. I can name anything X, Y, Z, okay? But finding a name that tells us the intention of this thing is a hard task for us as developers. I can assure you invalidating cache is also very hard, but naming is one of the hardest. So in Oxford dictionary, naming is a specify some time or place as something desired, suggested, or decided on. But you will see that our definition of us will be a little bit different from this definition. So in our life, names comes more from the domain experts. But as developers, we can also find some names when we are coding, when we are working. In these cases, we need to share these names that we find with our team and also with our domain experts to approve them. We can maintain these names in a sort of glossary, for example. Names are also a set of rules. These are more the naming conventions, and they depend on, for example, the framework that we work, the language that we use. And for these naming conventions to define these rules, we need to gather all the developers of our team to a room and talk about them, define rules, and then once they are set, we need to respect them. Okay, and we can put these rules in some kind of documents or even as linters like the one of Airbnb and Google. And the most important thing about naming is that a tool to communicate between developers. We communicate to each other through our code, even with ourselves, because we came back to this code that we wrote, and we need to understand what was the intention, what we need to understand what this code do. And the key thing is that the collaborative modeling can really help us in DDD to find these names, to define these rules, and to have an easy communication between members. What do you see here? A map, right? This map is a map of a game that named Skyrim, and when you are playing with this game, you can see you can find your way on this map through the boundaries that you can see between different countries, and you can also find some names. These names do help us to do a mapping, to understand where in which way we should to go to find our destination. In our code, it's the same thing. When you, for example, name your class something repository, that helps you to find your way to understand that this class is a repository, and I need to open it, go through it if I need to do some modifications in my repository, in my database. And so in our definition, naming is a process that helps us to understand what is the intention beside something without going deep on it, without going in details, without need to open a class or a method to understand, or a function to understand what is inside. So Donald Knuth says that programs are meant to be read by humans and only incidentally for computers to execute. So that's where naming is really important, because that helps us to understand intentions. You always be in this situation to find two methods with the same name, for example, delete x1 and delete x2, and imagine you are playing a game. One of the buttons can launch a nuclear bomb, a nuclear weapon, and the other can just disable this weapon. So if you don't have the right names for your methods or your arguments, you will need to go through these methods, read the code, and understand which methods do what. Okay, I think most of us were in this situation to having the difficulty with choosing some class, some methods. And as Arlo Bilshi said in the 7th stage of naming, it's not something that we can find in one iteration. Always we need to have many iterations on our names to find at the end something which is really close to our ubiquitous language, to our domain. And in this 7th stage of naming, from the 5th step, we can start to have something that can be close to our domain names. And this concept also comes from the conceptual contour of supple design in domain-driven design. In Blue Book, we talked about supple design, and conceptual contour is one of the principles that can help us to find better names by doing many iterations. So the question that I have for you is, what is the intent beside this project structure? Can anyone help me to understand it? So it's not very easy to tell what is the intent here. Why? The idea here is that we are focusing on technical terms. Okay, for example, controller, parcel, helper, service, I don't know why. These are all technical terms. Okay, and when you open each of these packages, you will see many contexts mixing together. For example, book, purchase, payment, client. Okay, and again, that will not help us to find the intent beside this project architecture or structure. Now, what is the intent here? Can anyone help me to understand the intent?
I think maybe booking an interview, and I think there's candidates and recruiters.
Very well.
And a room.
Very well. So here easily you could tell me what was the intent and why. Why it was easier.
But I guess you could achieve the same thing by seeing the methods of those services, right?
Yeah, but maybe the idea is not to open the classes.
And why is that? Anyway, you have to open the packages.
You know, imagine that you want to debug, okay? You can't go through each of the classes to find your method. You need to have, remember the map that I show you. You need to have some map, okay, in your project structure to tell you, okay, go to this package, to this class to find probably the line that produces a bug. We need to save time. We need to save money. So names can help us to achieve that. So you are right. We should also do that to our methods, to our functions. But also in a...
You know, I just want to say it's just different perspective of seeing the behavior of the system. Okay, so I wouldn't say that it's, you know, that the previous one is very vague. No one can understand what's going on. Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I guess we can achieve the same thing, right?
Maybe This is not the only solution to this problem, but this kind of architecture, we name that screaming architecture. So in this kind of architecture, you can easily understand what are the use cases of your system. Okay, so you can cancel an interview, confirm an interview, reschedule it. You can also understand what is your domain about, what is the intent of this of the system, who are the actors. We want an interview. Our actors are the recruiter, the candidate, and all the technical stuff. We can put them somewhere else, for example, in the infrastructure service. So the difference between this project structure is that in this new project structure, we focus on domain, not to technical terms. And here we are just covering one context, not many contexts, like what we saw here. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about the building blocks that we can find in DDD. For a repository, which name do you prefer? Book repository, book collection, books, library, which one? In our choice, all these names are correct. It depends on the naming convention that you set with your teams, with your team members. Okay, if in your team you decide to name all repositories the aggregate name, which is book, with the suffix repository, it's okay. You should accept that and use it. You should respect it. Okay. In our team, we decided to have the aggregate name, which is book plus S. Why? Because a repository is a collection of data and represent an aggregate. So books, recruiters, candidates could be good choices for us. We could also go for the domain term, which is a library. So many books is a library. But our choice was the third one. Again, in Supple Design, we talk about intention revealing interfaces. It means that when we open an interface, we need to have methods that tells us what is the intention of this interface without going to the implementation of any interfaces. Okay. What about the implementation of repository now? Which name do you prefer? In our choice, we goes more for Mongo books. Why? Because as we are in a package which allows us to use technical terms, for example, the infrastructure that we saw, we can use some technical terms. So Mongo here is a technical term, and when a developer open this class, he can understand that we are working with Mongo database, and he's supposed to see the code that is related to Mongo database. Book data could be a kind of this information. Maybe book data is also used for DTOs, data transfer objects. Okay. Or book repository EMPL does not give us more information about what kind of book repository we are working with. So our choice was more prefix type with the repository name. And by this convention, we can also create some other implementations of the books repository. For example, for tests, we can go for fake books. Okay, that helps us to understand that in this implementation, we can have some fake data and we can use them for tests. How about the infrastructure service? Which name do you prefer for the infrastructure service?
Maybe the first one?
The first one? Okay. Okay. In our choice, the better names is the third one. Because an infrastructure, it's like a repository, it's an abstraction, but the difference is that an infrastructure service don't do any save data. We can use the data, we can use, for example, some mapping, but we will not preserve data. That's the main idea between infrastructure service and a repository. And to don't have a confusing with for example repositories, we can go for a domain term. An infrastructure service is also a part of our domain. So recruiter's calendar, for example, can help us to understand that with this infrastructure service we can have some data about the recruiter's calendar. Recruiters could be a kind of disinformation with the repository, and recruiter infra, recruiter mapping, or recruiter something else could be also a good choice. The problem is that mapping, infra, HTTP are the technical terms, and we don't want to have technical terms in our domain. So we go more for the third suggestion. What about the application service? So an application service is a class that contains the scenario of one or many use cases. Okay, so our choice is a domain term, even if the application service in the architecture is not a part of the domain layer, as it contains domain concepts, I mean the use case. We can go for the second suggestion, which is a domain term. So plan interview, it's a verb. It corresponds to a use case, which is planning an interview. And we can understand, if we go to this class, we can find the scenario of how we can plan an interview. The first choice, interview service, is a kind of this information, because we have many type of services, mostly when we work with domain-driven design. And so service cannot help us to understand which kind of service we are working with. And as I already put all my use cases in a package that name use case or action, it's a duplication, it's redundant to have plan interview action or plan interview use case. That's why we go for the second choice. Let's talk about the domain service. Which one do you prefer? So the domain service is a part of your domain in the architecture or not. And so a very good choice is to having a domain term. So interview planifier. Again, in plan interview service is a kind of disinformation, as we talked about. Now let's go to talk about a little bit bad practices of namings that we name naming smells. The first one is to make the ubiquitous language pronounceable. As we all know, when we are naming, we should avoid the names that are not pronounceable. And the idea is to use a name which is pronounceable. But imagine that you have a domain term which is SPBB. It's not really pronounceable, but the definition is strategic performance based budgeting in Thailand. Okay, and so imagine if in any conversation, in any line of codes, you are using strategic performance based budgeting instead of SPBB. And SPBB is, everybody knows, everybody use it. All your team understand the intention beside SPBB. So you don't need to have not the acronyms in your code. It's not, you are not forced to. You can use them if they are part of your domain. The second one is incoherent names. Imagine that you decide with your team to add something in your repositories to create some objects in your database, and some developer use just put something for you for doing that. It's dangerous because imagine you want to implement the same method, you look for it, you look for any add, for example signal, and you can't find it, and then you decide to implement it by yourself while it exists and it's also created by another developer. So even if this developer had a very good reason to choose put something, he shouldn't, and he should respect the decisions of the team and use add signal for example in this case. When you talk with your domain experts, with your teammates who are not technical, do you use technical terms? Yes or not? I think your answer is no. So you don't need to also have technical terms in your code. Your code is also a model of your domain. Okay, so if in your conversations, in your documents, you don't use technical terms because everyone needs to understand them, your code also should be understood by non-technical people. And so the terms like abstract call list, player imp are not the very good choice for your domain layer and your domain terms in your code. Now imagine that you are in the context of human resources, and you have a context where you are looking for some candidates. Okay, this is the sourcing bounded context. So in this bounded context, you look for skills and source of conduct of the candidate. We could have a second bounded context, which is interview. So the candidate will pass some interviews, and here you look more about these skills, the name, the experiences, and maybe the soft skills of this candidate. And let's say that we have a third context, which is contracting. It's when the candidate finishes his recruiting process and wants to sign a contract. So here we look more about the name, the address, the social number, and the salary. Okay, so here we are mixing context, and we can see that how a little candidates could grow over the time, accumulating many properties. And that's very dangerous because a bug in this candidate object could impact many parts of our system, which are contracting, sourcing, and interview. So the idea in DDD is to keep each of these candidates in their own isolated bounded context. Okay, even if we duplicate some informations for example, the name, it's not a problem. We accept the duplication, but we keep each part of system isolated in its own bounded context. Even if this candidate is the same person, it's not important. Okay. And now I have a question for you. Is this candidate term is the right name in each bounded context?
Not necessarily.
Okay, what do you suggest?
Maybe in some case, I guess, yesterday also we discussed it. In some cases, I guess in this system, they say profile instead of candidate, okay,
Yeah,
in recruiting process, okay? In some cases. And maybe we transfer the same data somewhere else. Then it's candidate, maybe it's profile. Sometimes it's CV something, okay? And after hiring, maybe we have the same data as employee or something.
Okay.
So I'm not a domain expert, so but I know about profile and candidate at least.
Let's talk about sourcing bounded context. Is the candidate a good term for sourcing bounded context?
I don't know that much about sourcing exactly.
It's like many social networks that where a human resource goes to find candidates.
Maybe profile in this case.
Okay, let's help a little. So in sourcing bounded context, a candidate is someone found on a recruitment network with a CV that matches the search criteria. In the interview is someone who should be evaluated by a technical recruiter. And the same person in contracting bounded context is someone who passed his interview successfully and will be integrated to the company. So I will ask the question again. Is this candidate term is the right term for all these three bounded contexts? Could anyone suggest better names for any of these bounded contexts?
What I'm thinking right now is that in DDD we have this situation that a name means different things in different contexts, and that's a sign for us to separate our bounded context.
Very well.
So I don't think that having the same name is necessarily bad. Maybe if we have the same name in different bounded contexts while we are translating things and passing data from one bounded context to the other, that clears the condition, the situation for the person that is reading the code. But maybe, I don't know, renaming things for being exact to their meaning can be a good idea. I don't know about that.
Okay.
And maybe I can add something. If we are talking about a monolithic system, okay, with different bounded contexts, okay, so then I wouldn't use the same name for different types, not different candidates, because it's very confusing for the developers.
Yeah.
Okay, and sometimes it's very easy to misuse these types.
Very well.
Okay.
That's the idea.
So that's why I want to do that. Okay, if it's a distributed system or something, it's easier sometimes because they physically separated. But in this case, I would rather, even in some cases, I just handcraft the name, like, for example, the system name prefix the name of the entity, like, for example, HR candidate or something else. I don't recommend anyone to do that, okay? But at least in some cases, it can help, okay?
Yeah.
In Farsi, we have a poem that says, sometimes it helps. You know what I'm saying? Because having the same names is very confusing.
I totally agree with you. And I wanted to know if any other person have some suggestions for the names.
I can add something, not exactly suggestion, but a point we can see. When we change it the bounded context, so we moving from one bounded context to another. Most of the time in a team, in a organization, we are changing between teams and between peoples, and it's very important what the people in the team call this concept in each bonded context, and we can use hints from what exactly they call it. Maybe all of them call it candidate, so we can use candidate everywhere. But if there are several names in several bonded contexts, I know, like for example, in a e-commerce website, we have product in sailing departments, and we have shipments in shipping departments, and both of them refers to one items.
Yeah.
So I think this is the same thing here. If there are different names in different bounded contexts by people who are using it, we should use the same. Or if it's the same, we should use it the same.
You are right. Totally right. So, any other idea about the names? Okay. So, in the searching bounded context, we are looking for some people, they didn't start the interview process. They are prospects, they are not candidates. In the interview bounded context, candidate is a very good name. Okay, it's someone who is passing interviews, so it's a candidate. Maybe profile was a good idea. And in the contracting bounded context, it's not a candidate. Now it's a part of the company, so it's an employee. Okay, and so the idea is that putting things isolated in their unbounded context can help us to understand what was the real mean, what was the intention beside them, and then find better names for each of us, for each of them. Okay. The last bad practice is to translate ubiquitous language. Okay. So imagine imagine you are working in a Latvian system, and as you work with an international team, you will translate everything to English. You want a code that is in English. And imagine that clients, it's a part of your ubiquitous language. Imagine 3 developers that goes on Google Translate and looks for an equivalent of client in English. The first one find client, the second one find customer, and the third one patron. And each of them will use this client, customer, patron in the code. This code will not be readable at all. Okay, so the idea is to not translate the ubiquitous language, use the ubiquitous language as they are in our language. And even if we are forced to use an English term, the idea is in our glossary we should add a column that names the translation, and then all the developers will use this certain term in English for this ubiquitous language in our domain terms.
May I add
Sure.
something? Because I'm not sure if I'm completely agree with you. Because I work with a lot of clients here. Okay, I live in Austria, Vienna. Okay.
Yeah.
And their code is in German. Okay.
Yeah.
And their business is growing, and they have to hire more developers. I mean, international developers from different countries, and no one can read even a single word on that code. Okay.
Yeah.
So the issue with not translating is that, the audience of your code will be, smaller than English, version of the code. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm working for a consultancy company. Okay.
Yeah.
And we are also doing offshoring and things for the companies. And it's very hard to find a developer who can read and understand the code in another language.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any comment on that? So if we keep the same word in the same language, how we can fix?
The idea here is not to having all the code in German, but only the terms of the ubiquitous language, the domain terms. You can keep them.
It means business services, methods, and entities and fields, which is mostly the whole system.
Yeah, but you can have a mix of English and German. You know, you can have, for example, get clients service, for example. It's just an example. It's not a good example. But the idea is to, if you are not forced to, you can keep your ubiquitous language in the, you are not forced to translate the terms of your ubiquitous language. If you need it, if you are forced to, if, as you say, create any problem, at this time we need to find a common translation in English, which is, for example, customer. Okay, and then from this moment all developers will use customer in their code instead of clients. Not client, not patron, but customer.
Yeah, but it's easy to say, you know, maintaining it in the team for years.
You need to spend time to maintain things. When you do DDD, you need to have you need to work on the on maintaining things. Mostly in collaborative modeling, when you find your domain terms, when you define your ubiquitous language, that's something which is hard, that takes time, but it's necessary.
So the answer is that if this way we have to just increase the communication between developers and the business stakeholders, right? Just to come up with a proper wording, let's say.
It will, the idea is that when you talk with your domain experts, with a non-technical person of your team, you can understand easily each other. You will use the same terms, so you understand each other, and there will not be any incorrect information that the domain expert will give to you because he didn't understand what were you talking about. That's the idea.
And I want to add a reference to one of the talks that we have in our community, and it was specifically on the subject translating things in a domain. I will share the link in the chat box.
Yeah, unfortunately it's in Persian. I know which talk you're talking about, Elahe. But yeah, unfortunately it's just in Persian. But the idea is the same.
Yes.
So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure. So the final word is that you can use right terms in your diagrams, in your documentation, in your conversations. If you don't respect these name conventions, your ubiquitous language in your code, it's a non-benefit effort, because the truth is in our code. It's our code that will be executed and will become a product. Okay, so this code model that we create as developers needs to be read and understand by non-technical people, mostly the domain part. Okay, that's an exercise that I do with my product owners. When I finish some feature, I ask them to come sit with me, read my code, and tells me, is that what they are expecting from the system. If a non-technical person can understand my code, a technical person will understand my code. And that's something important, to respect naming conventions, naming rules in our code. And as Vaughan Vernon said in his famous book, Domain-Driven Design Distilled, it's very hard. It was really hard for us to filtering all the information that we would transmit, as we have a limited time. So we couldn't go in details with Khaled on this talk. And the idea is maybe we will do another talk, this time a 1 hour talk, and then in this session we can go more in details. So thank you everyone. I'm ready if you have any question.
Just to mention that we didn't have any questions on the YouTube comment section, and there's no questions in the chat box. So I think each participant now can ask their own questions.
You can also open your microphones and say it. I also put some resources. So we talked about Supple Design. So I put the links to conditional contours and intent revealing interfaces. And the first link is naming as a process. It's the Aro Bershi blog that's talked about the 7 stages of naming. Any question, Elahe?
No, I haven't received any.
So maybe I can still just continue talking. Okay. So one of the issues regarding naming that I have in my some of my project is that we are working with some organizations, okay, and they have a distributed team of business analysts, okay.
Yeah.
I know that it's not an agile term nowadays, okay, but they have.
Yeah.
Okay. And so waterfall is, a style of documentation and business analysts and stuff. And the specifications and the terms that they are using in different countries, okay, are different.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and sometimes it's very, it's not in our hands to just ask them to just somehow make it, somehow unify it.
Yeah.
I would say. Okay. And it affects our code.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, do you have any idea or link or something how we can, maybe guide them or help them, because it's completely out of our control. Like I'm working in some integration solutions. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are just connecting different organizations. Okay. So by its own, we are dealing with same concept, but by different names. Okay. But in every organization, they also have different terms to represent something. Okay, yeah. But the reason that they are talking different is, for example, people in Austria, okay, have different wording than, for example, Germany.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we don't have that much authority to force them to do stuff. And maybe somehow you can tell something how we can reduce the effects in our code.
Yeah, and these teams which are in Australia and Germany, they work on the same project, on the same code?
Not necessarily. Okay.
Okay.
But the thing is that we have to integrate their systems.
Yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if you were in our workshop last day, but for example, you can use some anti-corruption layers in the inputs of your system and translate these terms to your ubiquitous language. So you by this technique you can avoid to be corrupted by their system and their vocabulary.
Yeah, I know about ACLs, okay, but the thing is that sometimes we create different ACLs,
Yeah.
okay, and after some point we realize they were the same concept.
Yeah, I
Okay, and
understand.
the wording.
It's a question of a higher level managing. Okay, it's you are not as powerful as be able to manage that. You need some higher level organization that is convinced by this problem and then try to force some wording for each concept. Okay, that's the idea of creating glossaries, maybe creating some published language, okay, which is common and understandable by all teams. And in your position, I think it's really hard to do something. You need to talk with your managers about this problem.
All right, thanks.
You know, there is any magic solution.
The current solution that I'm using is I'm just using as much as BDD as I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I'm involving people. Okay, and sometimes I'm just forcing them just to participate in the meetings and read the specifications and stuff. Okay, so I mean, a Gherkin language could help.
Yeah.
A bit.
Okay, that could help.
Some use cases.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was just asked to maybe find any better solution or something.
BDD is a tool that we can use in collaborative modeling, and it could be very helpful. But the idea again is that to force all teams to use it. And again, in your BDD scenarios, if each developer, if each team use their own terms, you will face the same problem. Okay, so again, it's a question of organization, management that could come from high level staff of your company. But it could be a first solution using BDD.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Elahe. Thank you, DDD Ron, hosting me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we can finish now, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learned something, and please don't hesitate to give me any feedbacks, and I hope you will have a very good moment where you are.
Thanks. See you.